You dare disobey my orders? The hospital CEO roared in the crowded main lobby. Medical staff froze in their tracks. Many hid behind the reception desk, too familiar with these explosive rages. The new nurse stood perfectly still. Her eyes were strangely calm. The CEO stepped forward, raising his hand to slap her, right in front of dozens of people. An elderly nurse whispered shakily, "Don't, he really does it." But in just 1.8 seconds, she twisted the CEO's wrist, locked his joint, and forced him down to the floor. The entire lobby went dead silent. A doctor gasped, "That restraint technique, that's not civilian training." The CEO screamed from the floor, "Who are you?" She answered calmly, "Ex-Marine Corps combat medic." Nurse Emma Hayes, 30 years old, had just transferred to St. Aldan Hospital. After many years away from the military, her gentle appearance and quiet nature made everyone think she was easy to bully, the new girl who wouldn't last long. The hospital culture had long been drowning in fear. Fear of CEO Raymond Holt, a man notorious for violence, rudeness, and humiliating employees. Emma observed how everyone bowed their heads around him, avoided eye contact. No one dared to contradict the CEO. Once, she witnessed a young nurse have a clipboard slammed against the wall, right next to her face by the CEO. Everyone stood frozen like statues. A doctor whispered to Emma in the hallway, "Here, if you say one wrong thing, he can destroy your entire career." Emma smiled faintly, said nothing, but her eyes showed she wasn't afraid of men like this. During her break, Emma quietly helped an elderly patient adjust his breathing tube. This small act moved the patient's daughter to tears. Some staff members whispered mockingly, "She's too nice. She won't survive here." Emma just focused on her work, handling cases with unusual accuracy and composure. An older nurse witnessed her extremely precise endotracheal intubation technique. She whispered, "That skill, that's like wartime combat medics." The final witness detail of this act came from the hospital security guard. He recalled how Emma once single-handedly caught a heavy patient falling from a stretcher, while maintaining perfect balance. "She's much stronger than she looks." Emma's first days were marked by careful observation. She noticed how nurses' hands would shake when they heard the CEO's footsteps down the hallway, how doctors would change their medical opinions mid-sentence if Holt entered the room. The atmosphere wasn't just hostile, it was suffocating. She saw young nurses crying in supply closets, experienced doctors developing stress-related health problems, administrative staff having panic attacks in bathroom stalls. One afternoon, Emma was organizing medication supplies. Two nurses spoke nearby, not realizing she could hear them. "I can't take another day like yesterday," one said, her voice breaking. "He threw patient files at me because the discharge summaries weren't in the format he wanted." The other nurse replied quietly, "What can we do? He's untouchable. The board protects him because he cuts teeth." Emma said nothing, but she remembered everything. She'd encountered her leaders like Holt before, tyrants who confuse fear with respect, men who use power as a weapon instead of a responsibility. In the military, such leaders were removed quickly, but in civilian institutions, they could reign for decades. That evening in her small apartment, Emma stared at the shadow box on her wall. Inside was her Marine Corps combat medic badge, her staff sergeant, stripes, and a photo of her unit from Helmand Province. She'd left that world seeking peace, but was beginning to understand that battles existed everywhere. Some happened in hospital corridors. Some enemies wore expensive suits instead of uniforms. The next morning, Emma found the young nurse from the clipboard incident, sitting alone in the break room, eyes red from crying. "You okay?" Emma asked gently. The nurse looked up, startled, then quickly wiped her face. "I'm fine, just tired." Emma sat across from her. "You don't have to pretend with me." Something in Emma's steady, non-judgmental tone made the young nurse's composure crack. "I can't quit. I have student loans, my mother's medical bills. If I get fired, if he blacklists me in this city..." She covered her face with her hands. Emma reached across, squeezed her shoulder once firmly. "You're not alone anymore." The young nurse didn't understand what that meant, but for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. A cardiac arrest case was rushed into the lobby. The emergency room was completely overwhelmed. All doctors were trapped handling multiple simultaneous cases. CEO Holt appeared out of nowhere, shouting, blaming staff for incompetence causing hospital chaos. Emma stepped forward without hesitation, checking the patient, not waiting for authorization from superiors. The CEO snarled at her, "Who gave you permission to touch him?" Emma replied calmly, "If we don't shock him within 10 seconds, he won't survive." The CEO lunged forward, trying to grab the equipment from her hands. Emma ignored him completely, calmly performing chest compressions, issuing rapid orders to the on-duty team. "Oxygen! Prepare the AED." Several staff members stood watching, terrified the CEO would punish the entire team. The CEO roared, "You undisciplined fool, you're breaking protocol." Emma delivered the shock. One clean discharge. The patient's body jerked, then responded. His heart beat again. Those around stood absolutely stunned, especially employees who'd had their spirits crushed by the CEO for years. A nurse whispered to another, "The way she handled that, like someone who's worked on the edge between life and death." The CEO stood there, humiliated before the entire lobby, his face turning darker with rage. He pointed directly at Emma, his fingers shaking with anger. "You're finished. I'm firing you today." A witness later testified. The head nurse said, "My hands were shaking uncontrollably, but hearing her voice, I stood up straight, like there was a real commander present." The entire crisis lasted less than 4 minutes, but it changed everything. Emma had saved a life. In doing so, she'd exposed what everyone knew but never said aloud. Raymond Holt cared more about control than patience. As the rescued patient was wheeled to intensive care, Emma slowly stood up, her scrub slightly disheveled. Breathing steady, she made direct eye contact with Holt. For the first time in his career at St. Alden, someone didn't look away. "Your protocols," Emma said quietly, "almost killed him." Holt's face turned crimson. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Emma replied with the same calm tone, "Actually, I do." The standoff lasted only seconds, but every person in that lobby felt the shift. The impossible had just happened. Someone challenged Raymond Holt, and the sky didn't fall. Around the lobby, staff members exchanged glances, some filled with hope, others with terror at what might come next. An experienced surgeon, Dr. Patricia Chen, watched from the second-floor railing, her hands gripping the metal so tightly her knuckles turned white. She'd worked at St. Alden for 18 years. 18 years of watching Holt destroy good people. And this was the first time she'd seen anyone stand up to him. That evening, Emma received anonymous text messages. Some were warnings. "Watch your back. He'll destroy you." Or others were quiet expressions of gratitude. "What you did today, I'll never forget it." One simply said, "Please don't leave us." Emma read each message carefully, then looked at the shadow box on her wall. She'd thought she was done fighting. But perhaps the most important battles weren't fought with weapons. They were fought with courage, in moments when everyone else was paralyzed by fear. The next morning, Emma walked into the hospital, fully aware Holt would retaliate. Men like him always did. But she also knew something he didn't. She'd faced far worse than him, and was still standing. Meanwhile, Raymond Holt sat in his executive office, phone pressed to his ear, talking to his personal lawyer. "I want her gone, today. Find me a legal reason. I don't care what it takes." What Holt didn't know was this. His administrative assistant, a woman he'd belittled for 8 years, was standing outside his door, and she was recording every word on her phone, hands shaking but determined. The culture of fear was beginning to crack, and once it started, there would be no stopping it. The next morning, the CEO summoned all staff to the large main hall for Emma's so-called disciplinary action. In front of the entire crowd, he stepped onto the platform, smiling coldly. Yesterday, a newcomer disgraced the honor of this hospital. Staff members bowed their heads. No one dared look at Emma, too accustomed to years of psychological torture. Emma stood motionless, hands behind her back, perfectly calm. The CEO stepped down from the platform, approaching her slowly, raising his hand to slap her, in front of the entire hospital. This was an action he'd done to many nurses over 10 years, but no one had ever dared resist. In 1.8 seconds, Emma pivoted, locked the CEO's arm, and forced him to kneel on the floor. Everyone gasped in absolute shock. A doctor choked on his words. That arm lock! That's standard Marine Corps technique. The CEO screamed from his knees, "What are you—" Emma Mail released his arm, reached into her scrub pocket, and pulled out an old ID card. United States Marine Corps, combat medic, rank, staff sergeant. The entire hall erupted in whispers. She's a Marine combat medic? That explains everything. A doctor who'd been humiliated by the CEO for years burst into tears. Finally, someone dared to stand up. The CEO trembled, attempting to stand, attempting to leave, but employees blocked his path. A nurse he'd tormented for years stepped forward. "We're not staying silent anymore." Then the flood began. A torrent of accusations rang out through the hall. Physical assault, forced overtime without pay, career threats, covering up medical errors to protect hospital metrics. The board of directors appeared at the back of the hall, their faces pale, demanding the CEO's immediate suspension. "Right there on the spot," Emma said one sentence, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Your culture of fear ends today." Then came twist number 2. An investigative journalist stepped into the hall. She'd been collecting complaints for months, waiting for the right moment. The investigation would immediately expand nationwide. Every hospital Holt had ever worked at. The CEO was escorted out of the hospital. Security on both sides, in absolute silence. But the story of that morning was far more complex than a simple confrontation. Emma hadn't reacted on pure instinct when Holt raised his hand. She'd made a calculated choice. During her 8 years as a combat medic, she'd been trained in de-escalation techniques, defensive tactics, the precise application of force necessary to control without causing injury. When Holt's hand came toward her face, she'd had several options. Step back, dodge, call security. Instead, she chose to demonstrate something the staff desperately needed to witness: that the emperor had no clothes, that bullies, when confronted, crumble. As Holt knelt on the floor, face flushed with rage and humiliation, Emma leaned close, spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. "I've treated Marines who lost limbs and never complained. I've held dying soldiers who used their last breath to ask about their teammates. You're not powerful. You're just loud. And that ends now." When she released him and displayed her military ID, it wasn't about showing off. It was about giving everyone else in that room permission. Permission to be brave. The moment Emma's background was revealed, everything clicked for the staff. Her composure under pressure, her precision, her refusal to be intimidated. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a warrior who'd chosen healing. Patricia Chen stepped forward from the crowd, her voice shaking but clear. "I've worked here 18 years. For 18 years, I've watched Raymond Holt destroy good people. He's made nurses quit medicine entirely. He's caused panic attacks, breakdowns, worse. I stayed silent because I was afraid, but I'm not afraid anymore." One by one, staff members began speaking. The floodgates opened completely. A lab technician described being shoved into a wall over a mislabeled specimen. A junior doctor detailed systematic wage theft, unpaid overtime that added up to thousands of dollars per person. A janitor revealed something shocking. Holt had personally destroyed security footage after violent incidents. To cover his tracks, an administrative assistant produced printed emails showing Holt had ordered staff to falsify patient wait times to improve hospital metrics and secure his performance bonuses. The board members, standing in the back of the hall, exchanged horrified glances. They'd suspected Holt was difficult to work with. They hadn't realized he was criminal. As hospital security finally escorted Holt toward the exit, he turned back one final time, face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he spat at Emma. Emma met his eyes, with the same unshakable calm she'd maintained from the beginning. "Yes," she said simply. "It is." The doors closed behind him, with a heavy thud that echoed through the silent hall. And for the first time in a decade, St. Alden Hospital exhaled, collectively. Nurses hugged each other, crying. Doctors stood straighter. Even the maintenance staff seemed to move with less weight on their shoulders. An elderly nurse who'd worked at St. Alden for 23 years approached Emma, tears streaming down her weathered face. "I have grandchildren," she said quietly. "I stayed because I needed the pension, but every day I died a little inside. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever." Emma took her hands gently. "You never lost it. You just had to wait for the right moment." The head of the board of directors, Margaret Sullivan, approached the center of the hall, raised her hands for silence. "What happened here today," she began, voice trembling slightly, "should never have been allowed to happen. As a board, we failed you. We ignored signs. We dismissed complaints. We prioritized metrics over humanity. That changes now." She paused, looked directly at the crowd. "Effective immediately, Raymond Holt is suspended pending criminal investigation. We are implementing emergency protocols for staff protection, and we are committed to rebuilding this hospital's culture from the ground up." She turned to Emma. "Ms. Hayes, we would like to ask you to temporarily coordinate our internal culture reform efforts, if you're willing." Emma looked around at the faces watching her. Hopeful, exhausted, desperate for change. She nodded once. "I'll do it, but not alone. This has to be everyone's work." News spread like wildfire across media outlets. Hospital CEO accused by staff of violent behavior spanning 10 years. Former hospitals under his leadership came forward, also submitting evidence files. The pattern was undeniable. The board of directors permanently fired him, forwarded his case to law enforcement authorities. Criminal charges were being prepared. Emma was invited to temporarily coordinate internal culture reform. She accepted with one condition, that the staff would lead the changes, not her alone. She began by creating a genuinely safe environment, anonymous reporting hotlines that went directly to an independent ethics committee, security cameras in all public areas, clear anti-violence policies with real consequences. For the first time in a decade, staff raised their heads when coming to work. No longer bracing for the familiar sound of shouting echoing down hallways. Many people cried, not from fear anymore, but from psychological relief after 10 years of constant terror. A young nurse said to Emma one morning, "If it weren't for you, we'd be living in darkness forever." Emma shook her head gently. "You were always strong enough. You just needed someone to go first." A symbolic gesture was implemented. Emma's Marine Combat Medic ID was placed in a glass case in the main lobby, a permanent reminder of courage. The hospital hung a new motto above the reception desk. In bold letters, "Respect saves lives." The medical community began talking about St. Alden, praising it as the fastest cultural reconstruction case on record. But transformation didn't happen overnight. It required work, deliberate, exhausting work. Emma spent the first week conducting private interviews with every staff member who filed complaints. She listened to stories that made her jaw clench. A nurse who'd been grabbed by the throat for asking a clarifying question about medication dosage. A doctor threatened with fabricated malpractice charges because he disagreed with a treatment plan. A receptionist told she was too ugly for the front desk. Reassigned to a basement filing room for 3 years. Emma documented everything meticulously. She'd learned in the military that justice required evidence, precision, and follow-through. She worked closely with the hospital's legal team and the board to implement immediate, concrete changes. A new reporting system was installed that bypassed department heads entirely, going straight to an independent ethics committee with real authority. Mandatory training on workplace respect and harassment, scheduled for everyone, from custodians to surgeons. No exceptions. Security protocols were updated to include wellness checks for staff, not just patients. But Emma also did something unusual, something that surprised everyone. She started each morning walking the hospital floors, greeting everyone by name, asking how they were, and actually listening to the answers. At first, people were wary. They'd been burned before by false promises, empty gestures from administration. But Emma was consistent. Day after day, week after week, she showed up, not as a boss, as a fellow human being who genuinely cared. Slowly, the culture shifted. like ice melting in spring. Nurses smiled more, made eye contact. Doctors collaborated instead of competing. The oppressive weight that had hung over St. Alden for years began lifting. One afternoon, Dr. Patricia Chen knocked on Emma's temporary office door. "Do you have a minute?" Emma gestured to a chair. "Always." Patricia sat down, hands folded in her lap. "I wanted to thank you, not just for what you did with Holt, but for what you're doing now. I've been in medicine 25 years. I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually enjoy coming to work." Emma smiled softly. "You did the hard part. You spoke up when it mattered most. I just gave you the opening." "Maybe," Patricia said thoughtfully, "but you need to know something. People here look up to you now. You've become a symbol. That's powerful, but it's also a lot of pressure. Don't carry it all alone." Emma nodded slowly. "In the Marines, we had a saying, 'No one fights alone.' I'm learning that applies here too." The hospital organized a town hall meeting, 3 weeks after Holt's removal. Nearly every staff member attended. Emma stood before them, no longer wearing scrubs, simple professional attire, her Marine ID badge pinned to her blazer. "This transformation isn't about me," she said clearly. "It's about all of you. You survived years of abuse. You protected patients even when your own safety was at risk. Now we build something better." Together, the room erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory clapping, but genuine, thunderous appreciation. For the first time in St. Alden's history, employees felt heard, valued, and safe. The former CEO was criminally prosecuted, lost his reputation, had all management licenses revoked. His career collapsed entirely and irreversibly. Emma was officially appointed to lead medical safety and operations, a permanent position with real authority. Staff members voluntarily signed commitments to build and maintain a respectful environment. The first time in the hospital's entire history, an anonymous letter arrived on Emma's desk one morning, simple handwriting on plain paper. "You saved us in ways that medicine doesn't teach. Thank you for your courage." The hospital transformed completely, became brighter, more peaceful, no longer filled with the constant sound of shouting and intimidation. Emma walked a full round every morning, greeting everyone with a gentle smile, checking in, making sure people felt supported. Full circle symbolism. Her Marine ID remained on the wall of honor, with a small inscription added below. "The one who ended the era of fear." When Emma spoke at a staff meeting one afternoon, her words simple but powerful. True strength doesn't lie in power or position. It lies in how we protect others, how we stand up when someone vulnerable needs defending. The lesson began spreading throughout the medical industry. Articles were written, conference presentations given. No one has the right to be violent toward those more vulnerable. Period. 6 months after Raymond Holt's removal, St. Alden Hospital was unrecognizable, not in physical structure, but in spirit and culture. The changes went beyond policies and procedures. They were visible in small, everyday moments. A resident asking questions without fear of humiliation. A nurse politely correcting a doctor's order without trembling hands. A janitor humming cheerfully while mopping the hallways. Emma had stepped back from the temporary leadership role, returned to direct patient care, which was what she loved most. But her influence remained everywhere. The reforms she'd implemented had taken deep root. One evening, Emma received a phone call from an unknown number out of state. "Is this Emma Hayes?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a nurse at Metropolitan Hospital downtown. I heard about what happened at St. Alden, about what you did. Our director, he's just like your former CEO, maybe worse. People are suffering, and I don't know what to do." Emma closed her eyes, felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. She'd hoped her story would be a one-time battle, won and finished, but she was beginning to understand. The war was much bigger than one hospital, bigger than one tyrant. "Tell me everything," Emma said quietly. Over the next hour, Sarah described a culture of fear. That mirrored St. Alden's almost exactly. Emma listened carefully, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. "Here's what you do," Emma finally just said. Meinen. Document everything. Get other staff on board quietly. Build your case thoroughly. When you have enough evidence, contact your board. And if needed, the press. And Sarah, you're not alone. I'll help however I can. When she hung up, Emma stared out the window, at the city lights twinkling in the darkness. She thought about the Marine Corps values she'd carried for years. Never leave a fallen comrade behind. It seemed that value applied here too, not just to patients, but to every person trapped in systems that were supposed to heal, but instead caused harm. Emma opened her laptop, began typing an email to Patricia Chen, the board of directors, and several healthcare advocacy organizations. Subject line, Proposal for Regional Healthcare Culture Initiative. If this problem was bigger than one hospital, then the solution needed to be bigger too. 3 months later, Emma stood on a stage at a national healthcare conference, her Marine ID badge pinned to her civilian blazer. She'd been invited to speak about leadership, safety, and cultural transformation in healthcare settings. The auditorium was packed. Nurses, doctors, administrators, medical students, all watching her intently. Emma looked out at the sea of faces and saw hope, exhaustion, and the same quiet desperation she'd once seen at St. Alden. "My name is Emma Hayes," she began. 8 years ago, I was a combat medic in the United States Marine Corps. I've treated bullet wounds in the desert, performed emergency surgeries in helicopters, held the hands of dying soldiers. But the hardest battle I've ever fought wasn't overseas. It was in a hospital corridor, against a man in a suit, who weaponized fear instead of bullets. The room was completely silent. "Here's what I learned," Emma continued. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite it. Cultural change doesn't happen because of policies or procedures alone. It happens because one person decides to stand up, and then another, and another, until standing up becomes normal instead of exceptional." She paused, let the words sink in. "Some of you are living in fear right now. Some of you have been silenced, bullied, threatened. You think you're alone, but you're not. There are hundreds of people in this room who understand exactly what you're going through, and thousands more across the country." Emma held up her Marine ID badge. "This badge reminds me where I came from, but it doesn't define who I am. What defines me, what defines all of us, is what we do when someone vulnerable needs protection. We didn't become healthcare workers to stay silent. We became healthcare workers to heal. And sometimes healing means fighting for the people who can't fight for themselves." The applause started slowly, then built into a standing ovation. That lasted 5 full minutes. After the conference, dozens of attendees approached Emma. Some wanted advice, others just wanted to say thank you. A few, like Sarah Chen from Metropolitan Hospital, wanted to share their own stories of change. "We did it," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Our director was removed last week. The board apologized publicly, and they've asked me to help lead the reforms. Because of you." Emma hugged her tightly. "Not because of me. Because of you. You had the courage to speak up." That night, Emma sat in her hotel room, opened her laptop, and began writing. An article titled, "The Military Taught Me How to Fight. Healthcare Taught Me What's Worth Fighting For." It would be published in a major medical journal 3 months later. Spark a national conversation about workplace culture, power dynamics, the responsibility of leaders to protect, not harm. Emma closed her laptop, turned off the lights, lay down in the quiet darkness. Tomorrow she'd return to St. Alden, put on her scrubs, walk the hallways, check on patients, smile at her colleagues, do the small, quiet work of healing. Because true strength, Emma had learned, wasn't about dramatic moments or grand gestures. It was about showing up every single day and refusing to let fear win. Some battles are fought with weapons, others are fought with courage. And the most important battles are the ones we fight for people who've forgotten how to fight for themselves. The legacy of Emma Hayes wasn't just the policies she implemented or the tyrant she removed. It was the permission she gave others to be brave. And that, in the end, changed everything. If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to SN Touching Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.